And welcome back to Stats of Sports. I am the Contain Kunas, and later on today is going to be the start of spring football for all the SEC and across the country. So let's get going with a spring preview of all the draft signings that went out, everyone else who's still there, with just a little early preseason projection before spring practice starts at some point tomorrow. We have the current SEC rankings pre-spring practices. Now, this is going to be based off of basically my projections off of it, how I end up seeing from what they have left over from after all the draft exits, all the early exits, and all the seniors going pro and going elsewhere. But starting from the bottom, we've got Vanderbilt. 3-9 last year. It was a rough season for them altogether. There's not really that much that gives you that much hope to say, oh, this is just going to go a lot better than it. Like, yes, you have a change kind of all over. Everything on the offense is going to be different. Your starting quarterback, Riley Neal's gone. They tried 4 different quarterbacks last year. None of them worked. None of them are still here. Riley Neal didn't work. Mo Hassan threw 11 passes. They transferred. Deuce Wallace, his completion percentage was 42%. And Alan Walters, he transferred without even throwing a pass. Even with having some of Vanderbilt's most prolific players on their team, from Keyshawn Vaughn, 4-year starter, outside of whenever they had Ralph Webb, Kalijah Lipscomb, Jared Pinkney, a very strong, at least upper core of what you should expect from the top running back, top wide receiver, top tight end. But they could not build on what they had with Kyle Shermer at quarterback 2 years ago, and he's still actually making it around in the NFL as a backup quarterback. But with Vanderbilt, they replaced their offensive coordinator with Todd Finch from Louisiana Tech. They replaced their defensive coordinator with Ted Roof, who was the coordinator for Appalachian State, who went 13-1 with that team. And at this point, there's not really anything on offense that you could just kind of go out and say, oh, this guy's going to be good. There is the 17th ranked pocket quarterback that's coming in as an early enrollee who may end up being a starter as a true freshman, or they have a junior college guy coming in as well. That's going to be a battle between them. But really, from what you can actually hope for it, Vanderbilt's defense still is going to be solid, which last year they weren't, but some of it got skewed for the fact that they went against LSU and gave up 63 points to them. So this year, they don't have the LSU on the schedule. Instead, they'll get A&M, which this year is actually probably about the same on that matter. But it's like, for them, they'll beat Mercer. They should beat Colorado State. They have a chance against Louisiana Tech, and you could see them possibly getting another win here or there, stealing an SEC game against maybe like Missouri, because that's the next team on the board here. Well, in the East. But for the bottom of the SEC West is going to be Arkansas, where it was a disaster for them. They fired their coach Chad Morris, where you could clearly tell towards the end of the season the team gave up on him. And you had their going into this year, they're bringing a lot back, so it's like there's a core that's there that you could end up seeing at least a bit more positives coming out of. So in Arkansas's case, there is they got rid of their coach. They have a new defensive coordinator who was on Missouri's coach last year, who got fired. They're next on the board at number 12. I'll speak to them in a bit. Now they're getting Felipe Franks coming in from Florida. That he doesn't have to do too hard. He doesn't have to be that great to be better than both of their previous transfer quarterbacks from last year, with Nick Starkel and Ben Hicks really not lighting up the boards at all. But offensively, though, besides that, they have a 1,000-yard rusher coming back in Rakeem Boyd. They have the trio of wide receivers, Treylon Burks, Trey Knox, and Mike Woods, all very solid receivers. If, like, the one thing Arkansas was able to do is disperse it fairly evenly between those three receivers. So they have an offensive core. So as long as they can end up having definitely a bit better of an offensive line, where that was, besides neither quarterback being worth a darn, Arkansas's offensive line was hot garbage as well. But going on into Missouri, they were 6-6 last year, and they had a lot of high expectations, to where just like Kentucky a year ago, the year before, where they got 10 wins surprisingly, there's a bunch of people in the SEC, a bunch of the writers thought that Missouri could end up being that third, maybe second team in the SEC East for this year, for the fact that they got Kelly Bryant from Clemson as a grad transfer. And outside of the times that he was hurt for part of the year, he really wasn't really that great of a quarterback whenever they had him. Only 15 touchdown passes during that time period. Now, once again, this coming year, they're going to get another transfer quarterback where you'd hope it'd be better, but Missouri's losing a lot of their offensive weaponry from, I am going to get this pronunciation wrong, but I will try it, Okuwubunom. Nah, yeah, Albert Okuwubunom is going to be one of the top 5 tight ends in this coming draft. So even though he was underutilized during his time frame at Missouri, a lot of tight ends are in that case in college. They don't really get their full potential until they get into the NFL. Just think about what happened with Gronk. He was a third or fourth round pick for the fact that he never got his full potential at Arizona. Just like this case. Now, Missouri is losing Jonathan Nance and Jonathan Johnson, their top two wide receivers, and their top D lineman, Jordan Elliott. As I said earlier, Barry Odom's gone. Most of their entire secondary is going to be out. The one thing that they built on from last year into this coming year is they have a very good 1-2 punch with the running back between Larry Roundtree and Tyler Beatty, who Beatty also had the most receptions on the team, even more than any of these top 3 targets from in the wide receiver tight end room. And Missouri, it took a while, but they finally got a new coach for Barry Odom. Just like with Vanderbilt getting the Appalachian State defensive coordinator, App State lost a bunch of their coaching staff this past year, and Missouri picked up their App State's coach, Elia Drinkwitz, who, 13-1 season, very impressive. Probably the second highest rated non-power conference school last season. But they are going to bring a good bit back, more than half of their offense and defense. And if you don't get, hopefully Sean Robinson can end up being a bit more of a factor than, or at least at least comparable to what Kelly Bryant was. So, and next we end up going to Ole Miss, where at this point you have a bit more excitement on a few of these following teams that from probably about 11 to 7, it's kind of the mid-tier where there is potential for them to be sleepers in this conference to end up going towards the upper half of the echelon on it. And starting with Ole Miss, a lot of the hype that comes off of it is the fact that they hired Lane Kiffin at coach. They returned their top wide receiver and their top 2 quarterbacks, John Reese Plumlee and Matt Corral. They bring back their top running back. So a bunch of their offense is going to be back, and Kiffin's a very good offensive playmaker on the coaching staff, and he can end up building an offense that'll be very solid for the coming season. It is just going to be how Ole Miss is going to be able to cope up front for the fact that their entire defensive line is going to be gone, and their outside offensive linemen will have also left. So with a bunch of these teams on there, it's going to be the line of scrimmage that's probably going to end up determining if they're going to be, like, they should be better because they have enough coming back to where they shouldn't be 4-8. But it's going to be more if they're going to be like maybe a 5-7 team, or if they can actually make a bowl game with 7-5. The big question on that is it's kind of to determine what's going to happen in that opening game against Baylor. So it's a neutral site game, but that's going to be an interesting one, basically trying to kind of start off the season and just get them on the right foot. But besides that, it's like they'll beat Southeast Missouri. They should beat Vanderbilt. They should beat UConn. They should beat Georgia Southern. That's your 4 already. Arkansas, they'll be favored against, and they could Baylor's a will see, and also Mississippi State's a will see. So they really could get 7 off of that because they're not going to win against Auburn, not going to win against LSU at LSU. They're not going to win against Bama. They're not going to win against Florida, and A&M isn't likely either. So they could go from like 4-8 and 7-5. Now, with their state league counterparts, you have Mississippi State also getting a new high-profile coach with Mike Leach, and he's going to end up bringing in some of his air raid offense that at this point you'd think would be kind of a off-kilter coercion between him and the starting quarterback for Mississippi State with Garrett Schrader. But for the fact that they ended up getting KJ Costello as a grad transfer from Stanford, he's coming from that West Coast offense in the Pac-12, and it should actually flow a lot better than what the offense did in the past 2 years with Joe Moorhead and Tommy Stevens. Well, and Nick Fitzgerald, because he was kind of Fitzgerald, and the Moorhead offense just didn't work at all. He regressed massively in that one season, so it really just wasn't a good fit. Now, despite the praise I go off of it, they are losing a lot. The fact that they're losing 3 of their top 4 targets between Stephen Guidry, Dedrick Thomas, and Farrad Green. None of them really getting an exorbitant amount of yardage, but for the fact that Tommy Stevens really wasn't a great pocket passer and really couldn't get too much going whenever he was healthy, and Garrett Schrader is definitely a more dual threat quarterback that could end up doing a few things on the run. It was a bit of a disappointing year, especially losing in the bowl game. But they do return Osiris Mitchell. They're leading. He only had 29 catches on the season, but he led the team in yardage and touchdowns. And Errol Thomas leads leads the Mississippi State defense on a team that is going to take a hit on their back end because they're one of the teams that actually held LSU fairly well, the national champions, fairly well in the first half, or at least the first quarter and a half. But offensively, between Costello, Kylan Hill, who is one of the top 3 or 4 backs in the SEC, and Osiris Mitchell, they have that main core with 3 of their 5 offensive line. Well, 2 of their 5 offensive linemen coming back. If they can just build up the other edges of it, they should be a bit better, if not the same, for the fact that it is going to be it's definitely a drastic change off of styles from different coaches. It's going to be an adjustment. So you can really flip-flop them and Ole Miss depending on your preference. I'm only putting State here just for the fact that it's a more experienced quarterback. And Kiffin is such a wild card where it's like that could end up bombing in flames. You just know Mike Leach is going to be entertaining. So I'll give him a little bit more credit based off of that. Then you have the team that had the most difficult schedule in this past season, and that'd be the South Carolina Gamecocks. The fact that they ended up playing Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, all in the same season. This one's going to be a little bit easier on them, except for the fact that instead of Alabama, they get LSU as their second opponent in the SEC West. With A&M being their common opponent from the West, they still have LSU and Clemson back-to-back to end the season. Yes, they have a bye week in between them, but instead of having North Carolina as an opening game out of conference schedule, they do only have Wofford, East Carolina, Coastal Carolina, so they may get a better record this season, but very likely for the fact of them losing one of their best receivers in their history in Brian Edwards. I only included Jake Bentley on this for the fact that it felt like he was there. He's been there forever. They're going to lose Javon Kinlaw, who is going to be a first round pick, if not like a top 10, top 15 pick. But last year you had Ryan Helinski have to come in early in the conference schedule because Bentley got hurt very early. So he had his ups and downs, the hills and valleys off of it. So another year off of that is going to help him for this year. But a lot of the top of the line talent that they had this past year, especially with Edwards and their top 2 running backs with Feaster and Dowdle, it's going to be they may have a better record this year without being an actually better team. And then that leads us to Kentucky, who is kind of the opposite for the fact that they are 8-5, even though they might not be as good of a team as their record was last year. Now, it is a little bit more because of the circumstances that you had Terry Wilson get hurt at the very beginning of the season, so Kentucky had to change around their offense. For the first few games, they had Sawyer Smith starting, and he barely completed 45% of his passes. So they ended up deciding, because of their offensive line being one of the best, if not the best in the SEC, which will still be the case this year, outside of Logan Stenberg going into the draft. They're all SEC left guard. This year, their offensive line is still going to be very good, but their entire offense of last year is gone with Lynn Bowden. they completely shifted their offense to make Bowden their starting quarterback, their wildcat guy, and he did everything for them. And where it's like you thought that once Wilson got hurt, it was just going to be a lost season for them. There was no chance they'd even be able to get to a bowl game. But they closed that season on a 4-1 record, with their only loss being to Tennessee. And ended up leaving them into the Belt Bowl, where they went against Virginia Tech after blowing out Louisville 45-13, and ended up beating Virginia Tech 37-30 with Bowden throwing less than 5 passes for the game. Now, this is going to go back to a little bit more of a standard offense, with Wilson being back, and they also have Joey Gatewood, that's a transfer 4-star quarterback from Auburn, who he may end up actually winning the job off of it. If not, he'll just be used as that new wild card guy for them. But because of Kentucky's skill set, they have multiple running backs outside of just Gatewood as a wildcat guy. Even with Bowden being gone, with Asim Rose and Kavoski Smoke, both of them getting over 600 yards rushing and 6 touchdowns apiece, their offensive line is going to be able to guide them to as good, if not better, production this year. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if either of them got over 1,000 yards. They're returning a decent bit of their defense as well, with Jamar Watson, Yusuf Corker, both at the linebacker position. They are going to have to build up a little bit more in the secondary, as they lost a couple of their safeties. But if not for that, you look at the schedule. It's like it's Eastern Michigan, Kent State, Eastern Illinois, Vanderbilt, and I could easily see them end up winning against Louisville again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They should make a bowl game. They should make a bowl game again, and they'll probably be battling to get this same record again. So, yeah, 8-5 seems realistic, because they're not going to win against Florida, even though they've played Florida very well the last couple years, including the 2018 game where they finally broke the 21-year drought that they have. I may have that number wrong, but it's in the 20s. Then also with Auburn, they're not going to beat Auburn. They're not going to beat Georgia. And really, yeah, Florida, Auburn, Georgia. Outside of those 3, everything else on the schedule is winnable. It's just I feel like they're going to end up splitting some of these kind of 50-50 games, especially with the next team on this list, which is Tennessee. Another team who end up in the end of last season very well after a slow start. Tennessee ended up starting 1-4 on the season, where everyone in the media and all SEC teams were trying to get a fire sale on Jeremy Pruitt, Jared Garantano, and the entire Tennessee team for the fact that they just gave up on them. They were not ready to play against BYU, and especially in that opening game against Georgia State, who in the previous year had won 2 games the entire season. So it was a full-grown panic at that point. But for as bad as it started, they went 4-1 in their last five games to be able to get to 7-5. Their only loss being to Alabama, who they actually kept it competitive in the first half until a late touchdown. But this was the initial Tua injury whenever it happened, so he kind of got rested after that. So they got to deal with Mac Jones for a while. But from the games after that, against Missouri, against Vanderbilt, and even the bowl game against Indiana, they won 23-22 on the last second field goal. Between Garantano later in the season and Brian Maurer, at different points of that Alabama game, there is talent there to definitely fight for that third position in the SEC East, which is completely up for grabs. The top two positions really are set. It's still going to be another Georgia-Florida matchup, but that third position, you can really think about it, any team besides Vandy and probably not Missouri, that's going to be that. Those are going to be battling for that third position, especially for the fact that Tennessee's run game is is three deep. That nearly all ran for 500 yards. Yes, they're going to lose. Yes, they lost their top two wide receivers, in Marquez Callaway and Jawan Jenkins. They only lost one of their offensive linemen. They lost some of their top pressurers with Daryl Taylor and Daniel Batuli. But for the fact that they're bringing back most every one of their starters, between 7 people on offense, 8 people on defense, and they're starting to join back again with the top teams in the country with recruiting. There's potential for Tennessee to get back up in the races. Maybe not so much this year, but just take another step up to where they'll be consistently that third best team in the SEC East. Then going away from the East, we go to Auburn, who they got beat down on what they lost on defense. They lose their top two defensive tackles with Derek Brown and Marlon Davidson. They were one team that had such a strong defensive line last year that they could end up running a very unusual defense against the more prolific offenses and be able to hold up fairly well. For the fact that they held LSU to 23 points in their matchup against them. And there's no other team in the SEC that held them nobody in the country held LSU to less than 37 points. So it's more for the fact just of how good Auburn's defense was last year. Like, it arguably was one of the best, if not the best, in the country. But this year they get hit with their top two defensive tackles going to the draft. Derek Brown's more than likely to be a late top 10 pick. Then the back end of their secondary is going to get hit. For their top 5 guys between Davis, Denson, Thomas, and Igbehene, and 3 of their interior offensive linemen. And for the fact that Jartarius Whitlow, at a very late hour of the, just very recently, he transferred from the program. He entered the transfer portal. So a lot of their very skilled players with both offensive line and defensive line and their back end secondary, those are gone. So you think there has to be some team from the West that's going to take a hit. And because you got to see some sort of improvement. You think you're going to see some sort of improvement from those bottom dwellers that are below Auburn. So unless you end up getting Bo Nix end up building drastically from his 59% completion percentage of last year and 2,500 yards. Yes, he played the whole season, but and didn't get injured. He's a dual threat quarterback, so he can end up getting a lot of his yards with his legs. But at this point, he's just kind of a cheapened Tim Tebow in his probably how he was his freshman year. But yeah, the one thing that Auburn does end up coming back with is they have all their skilled wide receivers coming back. The worst they have is their 4th receiver that graduated. that went the 4 years and is gone. KJ Britt is coming back. One of the few guys on the defense that actually had solid production that they're going to be counting on this year to step it up a notch. And they're going to have to end up relying on, which is going to be the same case for basically every other team above this as well. They're going to have to rely on their highly rated recruiting class, for Auburn being 7th in the country. And with that, we go to maybe the one team that's going to be the biggest sleeper to potentially win the SEC West, where you even have ESPN putting Texas A&M as the second best team in the West at this point. I'm not going that far at this point because Kellen Mond hasn't shown enough. But really, they're not going to lose that much. They're just losing 2 of their top 3 receivers with Courtney Davis and Kendrick Rogers, and their top defensive tackle in Justin Matabuike. So a bunch of the offensive line is going to be back. Their top quarterback, running back, their number 2 wide receiver, their top tight end. So they're going to have a lot of offensive firepower where a lot of the top tier teams, they're losing a bunch of their top guys to the draft. They had a bunch of juniors coming up. So this may be the most skilled team that's left in the SEC outside of, personally, my top pick. Well, top talent that is proven in the SEC. But if you go with A&M's schedule this season, the early on part of the season really isn't bad. Abilene Christian, North Texas, Colorado is going to be interesting. Arkansas, Mississippi State, Fresno State. At that point, at worst, you'll be 5-1, and probably you should be 6-0 at that point. So they'll be like, they're getting hyped up already. But if they're not at that point, like if they're not at this point of the off season, they'll be raving over them being 6-0 going into that Auburn game, where I think they'll be favored at Auburn and at South Carolina and Ole Miss and Vandy. You couldn't have getting that Auburn game to be a slip up. So there's a very plausible opportunity where you get A&M to start 10-0 with their last 2 games against Alabama and LSU. That's just going to decide who's going to win the SEC. They have that potential. But I am looking forward to that A&M Auburn game in particular. And really looking forward to that the A&M at the Colorado game. Now, Colorado is kind of the mid-tier Pac-12 team, so they should handle them if their skill ends up showing up, because Jimbo has to have a big year sooner or later. He got a 10-year contract. This is year 3. There has to be at some point where he has to be a bit more accountable outside of just getting 7 to 8 wins a season. And then with that, you go with the team that outperformed every one of the expectations this past year, finally broke through some of the curse of Alabama through 8 years past. And LSU, the homegrown Tigers, 15-0. Man, they're losing a lot. But I've spoken on this before. I'm going to do a draft recap once that comes up. We'll have a little fun. Just one last little recap through the 2019 season. Go through a few highlights of it. It's going to be a bit more editing on my effort for that. So look forward to that one. Just soak in the last point of the championship as everyone here goes pro. With Burrow, Edwards-Helaire, Jefferson, Thad Moss, you have your offensive linemen between Sadiq Charles, Damian Lewis, Adrian McGee, Lloyd Cushenberry. You have your linebackers with Jacob Phillips, Patrick Queen. You have your pass rusher with Kelvin Von Chassaw. You got Rashard Lawrence, Brandon Fajoko. And then you have in the back end, you got Christian Fulton, Braden, and Grant Delpit. Sheesh. That's a lot of top-end talent that they're losing. So this is a season that, just like last year, the Texas game is going to end up pacing on how the season's going to go. Because at this point, like with this season's schedule, there's a Texas game, and then if you get through Texas, you'll be 5-0 going at Florida, which has become essentially the second rivalry game between them and Alabama. Where, yeah, you're going to be favored in all of your games, except probably not Florida until that week 9 bye week, and then Alabama is just going to be a we'll see on it, because it is at home. The last 2 times LSU's beaten Alabama has been in Tuscaloosa, and for both LSU and Alabama, they're going to be bringing in a new starting quarterback and a bunch of new skill positions, where it's going to be a lot of new faces that you didn't see last year. Now, Alabama's going to be the same way on this, but for LSU fans, just be happy. You're going to get Jamar Chase, Terrace Marshall, and you got a few other wide receivers, high-profile receivers, between Racey McMath, between you have Jontre Kirkland, the former cornerback that became a wide receiver. You have Kayshon Boutte, who comes in as a 5-star recruit. There's Trey Palmer, who you saw brief glimpses of last year. And then there's plenty more, where it's like you have Eric Gilbert, a 5-star tight end that's coming in. You haven't been able to see a full season through, oh crap, what's his name? Oh, what's the tight end's name? Jamal Pettigrew. But he's been injured off and on for the past, 3 seasons. Whenever Moss wasn't available, whenever they had Sullivan as a starting tight end. So offensively, it's going to be kind of based off of how Brendan can end up melding with Chase, Marshall, and a bunch of the receiving targets. Now, the running game, even though Clyde was a very good back and very resourceful for being a pass blocker, between him being able to catch the ball in the flat, which is going to be probably one of his strongest traits while going in the NFL. I'm interested to see where he's going to end up going. But they do have a stable of running backs between the hype that we had with John Emery, between you saw how Chris Curry ended up shining in the Oklahoma game. And then LSU's primary backup running back last year, Tyrion Davis Price, who was a bruiser the whole year. Whenever they actually did play him, it's going to be interesting how things change off of this past year, from Burrow to Brennan, from Joe Brady to Scott Linehan as a quarterback's coach, wide receivers coach, and then from Dave Aranda to Bo Pelini as the defensive coordinator. But defensively, there's all the talent in the world. You have the defensive line. There's a starting 4 where they're going to go to a 4-3 defense, where it's Shelvin, it's Ike, it's Siaki Apu-Ika, it's Neil Farrell, it's Glenn Logan. That's your starting 4. You have Jacobian Guillory and Jacqueline Roy being 2 very high-rated freshman D linemen coming in to make some sort of depth on the case. The secondary is going to be very impressive as well. You got Stingley as very likely the top defensive back in the country, just as a sophomore. Jacoby Stevens, who's your strong safety, playing the kind of outside linebacker rusher, a bit of the role that Michael Devaney and Marcel Brooks played last year, but he'll be a bit of a pass rusher, a bit of a tight end cover guy. But he is one of the best tacklers. He's one of the better tacklers on the team. And then you have Cardell Flott, who ended up starting as the third corner. And whenever you add different cornerbacks out, he would end up playing that second role whenever Fulton was hurt. And then Todd Harris will be back as as a free safety, more than likely. Then you also have the top cornerback coming in, Elias Ricks. So it's not all doom and gloom, but don't expect this to nobody should expect this to match 2019's LSU team. What seems a bit more realistic is like a 10-2 season, 11-2 season, including the bowl game. So if you get less than 10 wins, I'd say yes, that's a disappointment, but there's going to be a drop-off. Even if you end up winning a national championship, there's going to be a drop-off. You're not going to get 60 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. If that's the case, Brennan's going pro after this, and he'll be another number 1 overall pick. I'll bet that over Trevor Lawrence. Actually, no, that's a dumb idea. He'd just be the number 2 prospect. And then after that, we'll go to the number 2 rival for LSU, the Florida Gators. And they lose a lot on their skill positions. Now, Florida may have taken the biggest skill position hit in the entire conference, losing their top 4 wide receivers and their starting running back, where this is really putting a lot of pressure on Kyle Trask to be more than just a good quarterback. They're trying to make him as to be the best quarterback in the league, which he has the potential to do. For the fact that as you kept going on through the season, he built upon that. He built upon what Felipe Franks was not able to do, and once he got hurt from like the LSU game, from yes, he kind of struggled in the Georgia game, but Georgia had the best defense that they had gone against the entire season. But his two losses, one against LSU, which he was keeping pace with Burrow for the first 3 quarters until late in the third quarter, where they couldn't convert on a couple goal line stands, and he ended up throwing a late pick in the fourth to where it just put him out of reach. So I can see why the hype is up for him. But for the fact that they're losing their top 3 guys on defense, with Zuniga, who was hyped up the entire year last year, which probably was a bit overrated, but in his case, you have Jonathan Greenard as a linebacker for them with 10 sacks, which led the SEC. So it's not just for the fact that he had less stats for the season, but he ended up picking up multiple blockers to where some of the linebackers were able to actually get into the backfield and get pressure on the quarterbacks and get pressure on running backs in the backfield, to where other guys like Greener, like Zuniga, like Reese, they can end up thriving and definitely picking themselves up for this coming draft. But back to Trask, the only thing really he's having back that has experience is his tight end Kyle Pitts. And as a true sophomore, 54 catches for 649 yards and 5 touchdowns. that's impressive stats for a wide receiver, which, if you look at it, Van Jefferson just had 8 more yards and 1 more touchdown than Pitts. Yes, Trask spread the ball around to 5 different guys very efficiently, but it's one of those things where this was his first time with an SEC offense going against SEC style defenses, and definitely was an admirable, definitely an admirable effort to where it's 11-2 season, especially with the bowl game. Well, the games get Florida State and then the bowl game against Virginia, where they kind of cruised early on. And this is with a bunch of the, this is with Zuniga and Greener not being in the game, where them resting for the draft. And he still threw for over 300 yards in that game. But honestly, I think overall, with the SEC, it is going to be more of a transitional year. Because last year, at least the top part of the SEC was very offensive heavy, which is kind of an anomaly. Like, Burrow was lighting up stats. Tua was lighting up stats. Trask, once he actually got in, was lighting up stats. Then outside of those top guys, yeah, Mond even had impressive stats. Same with Trask. Outside of those guys, there really weren't defenses that could keep up with them. So all those guys are gone. So they're all having their replacements outside of Trask and Mond. So those are going to be the top 2 guys, top 2 quarterbacks coming in. But everyone else is just bringing in a new quarterback. So the offense is going to definitely take more time to click. And potentially Florida could have the same issue that Jake Fromm had with Georgia last year, where outside of that one guy, there wasn't anyone with experience. For Fromm's case, it was DeAndre Swift. And for Florida's case, for Trask, it's going to be Kyle Pitts. He's going to have to build up a repertoire between the rest of the Florida wide receivers and the running backs, since Michael Piron's also going to be gone. But this year, he's going to be built up with definitely an improved defense. Yes, the front D-line is going to be the issue. The front D-line is going to be a little bit more suspect, but just like last year, the main issue for Florida will be that offensive line. But in the secondary for Florida, they're going to have the best secondary in the country. They have their top 3 guys coming back. Davis, Steiner, and Wilson all have 11 interceptions combined. Just last year, Davis and Wilson had 4, Steiner had 3. So everyone's really coming back on that defense, especially in the back end. So really, they are one that could be very dangerous. And they're getting hyped up enough to where you end up hearing people saying that Florida should be favored to win the East ahead of Georgia. Not for me, though. Then you got to go with Bama. You can't count out Saban. I am just going to say, hurry up and retire, yada, yada, go away. We're sick of you. But he probably thinks he has a little something to prove, especially against whenever he has to go to Baton Rouge with LSU. That last year, there's times his defense got really demolished between the games against LSU, between the game against Auburn, where, yes, there was a couple fluke plays in that Auburn game. And even the first half against Michigan, where they were losing at halftime against them. Sure, a lot of the guys decided not to play in that game, and this was with Mac Jones and not Tua. But Alabama is losing maybe the most big-name talent out of anybody maybe in the country. Tua's gone. Najee Harris is gone. Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs are gone. Two of the top 3 wide receivers are gone. Yes, you get Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle back, so it's not like they're going to be – it's not like they have issue with talent at this point. But Judy's going to be a top 10 pick. Ruggs is rated the number 3 wide receiver. Tua is the number 2 quarterback. Jedrick Wills, by some, is the top offensive lineman, if not number 2. I'll talk about the other one very, very soon. Then Anthony Jennings had a very strong season with 8 sacks and 12.5 tackles for loss. Terrell Lewis had 11.5 sacks and 11.5 tackles for loss and 6 sacks. He was one that before this season had a bunch of injuries, so he's one of those outside linebackers who is a bit light of frame for his position, but is very good at getting speed off the edge. Now Bama is losing a lot in their back end, even though outside really Trevon Diggs really wasn't that impressive. Like, yes, Diggs had 3 picks. McKinney had 3 picks. Maiden had 4 picks. But there was a lot of times this season they got torched up. And yes, some of it is for the fact that very early on Dylan Moses got hurt for the year, and which also led to him coming back for his senior season. But his replacements trying to build some young depth outside of that. It took a little while for it to end up blending well, and in some games it just never did. But from that, they were able to bring back. They got Moses. They have Christian Harris being his main replacement, who had a very solid season as a true freshman. Then they're also bringing back Alex Leatherwood, who, if he went to the draft, he would be a top 15, maybe top 20 pick. You got Patrick Surtain coming back for his junior year. He'll be a for sure first-round pick coming up. And just like always, they're just going to reload. Yes, the one thing that they may have issue on, and they did build on it in recruiting, is their running game. Because, Najee Harris is gone. Brian Robinson was kind of a mixed bag, and they really didn't have too much after that. They had Trey Sanders, who is going to be their third guy, but he got hurt in the spring practices, so he was out for the entire year. Now he's going to be back, and they're going to have a three-piece depth pie. Oh, I don't know what that came from in the backfield. And they've got 4 and 5 stars all across the offensive line to replace Leatherwood. To replace Dickerson at center and replace Wills. And getting Leatherwood back at left tackle helps as well. But while most people actually say Bama would be the team to beat, and I understand why people say that, they're just losing too much for me to actually agree on that line. I got to pick Georgia on this one. For the combination of Jake Fromm really wasn't great last year. There were different times where he really didn't have any targets to throw to, and the one game against South Carolina that he ended up throwing 3 picks on the game, yes, they ended up all going to the same guy, and yes, only 2 picks the rest of the season. And one of them being against LSU. But Fromm's gone. They're bringing Jamie Newman from Wake Forest to replace him. More of a dual threat quarterback. And at this point, they're getting another year with a bunch of their wide receivers through with George Pickens, who ended up coming on later in the season outside of his one fight with Pat Swilling's kid. What was it, Georgia Southern? I think it was. Yeah, I think that's right. Then the junior college transfer from Miami, Lawrence Cager, and then Demetrius Robinson. So all those guys are a year older, and that offense throwing the ball can only get better because a lot of times whenever Swift and Terry are in the backfield, they're putting seven in the box going through a pro-style offense where they're definitely weren't reinventing the playbook. And you would get Georgia fans just hating on Fromm and Kirby Smart, just not trying to spread out the offense. But if you end up seeing, especially in that SEC championship game, they couldn't count on those receivers to be dependable targets. But from watching the Baylor game and from watching the Baylor game and from getting the top recruiting class in the country, yes, they're losing Andrew Thomas, who outside of Wills, Wills will be the top right tackle going into the draft. Thomas is going to be the top left tackle going into the draft. Yes, they're losing J.R. Reed, who was a finalist for the Thorpe Award, but that went to Grant Delpit. But they're returning a lot on defense where they could end up fighting with Auburn for the best defense in the country and in the SEC. They'd be fighting with Clemson on it. But yeah, they held LSU to 37 points, and outside of that, 8.5 to 9 second play, that one really demoralized them for the rest of the game. There was one thing that they ended up saying in that game and kind of leading up to it that that really came that I'm remembering very vividly is the fact that at the time they didn't have anybody really that stood out. They didn't have any big names. They had good players that worked well in a scheme, but they didn't have that worked together as a whole, but they didn't have individual players that were top notch. All those really good players working in a scheme are coming back for the most part, outside of J.R. Reed, Tyler Clark. But this year you get another year under that system. That defense is only going to get better. And as long as Georgia can end up building up their offense more than just a standard pro style one back I formation, play action pass, 2 wide, 2 tight end, 1 running back. As long as they can make more variety on their offense, they are going to be one of the most dangerous teams in the country. Especially with having someone who has some sense of mobility, which Jake Fromm did not. But that's the end of this. So from Georgia all the way down to Vandy, this is my pre-SEC rankings. I thank you all for watching. Yes, I know this went a bit long, but trying to go through 14 teams, just giving a bit of in-depth analysis on each of those teams from what they have left over, from what they left behind. It takes a little time to get through. But if you did enjoy this, please subscribe. Please share this out to other people. Leave a comment down below for the fact that if you have any other videos you want me to make in the future, I'm all ears. I want to get some of other people's opinions on it. Also, please expect in the future, it is the beginning of March, so March Madness is coming up. The The conference tournaments are going to be starting this weekend, going into next weekend, going into the NCAA tournament bracket reveal. I'm going to give a little bit more details on those as some of the Power 5 conferences come together. But with that being said, I am the Contained Kunas. This is Stat 7 Sports, and I'll see y'all next time.